Good evening, everybody. This is Katje. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I want to start by wishing everybody, I'm hoping everybody had a happy Thanksgiving. I certainly had a wonderful time with my spouse, so I hope that you had a wonderful time with your families and friends, or however you chose to celebrate that holiday, if you did choose to celebrate it. And soon it will be Christmas and all the other holidays coming, like New Year's. So if you celebrate those holidays, I hope that you will enjoy them and have a good time. This evening I'm wearing a plaid skirt that I bought at Forever 21, and I'm wearing it with this black tank top and my knee-high leather boots. So I wanted to kind of have a cross between a schoolgirl look and a new wave look, because tonight I'm going to continue with a little more material from Wittgenstein, and what I'm going to do is discuss a little bit more, a little more of his philosophical ideas. I'm going to say something about his view of mathematics in the Tractatus and how that influenced a group known as the Vienna Circle, who then modified his views in certain ways. And I want to say a little bit about his interaction with them. And then finally, I'd like to read a little bit more from my own work, Tractatus Theologico-Philosophicus, for your enjoyment. So I realized that once again I'm sort of doing my eccentric thing, and I know it may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I hope you enjoy it, and if you have any questions or comment, you can leave them at the bottom of the video. So let me start out by saying a little bit about Wittgenstein's view of mathematics in the Tractatus. Remember that for Wittgenstein, logic is completely empty, because logic simply consists of logical truths, which are tautologies. It means they come out true no matter how the world is, and whatever truth assignments are made to the constituent propositions, the whole thing comes out true, so it doesn't really matter how the world is, how reality is. I explained that last time a little bit. But what about mathematics? So what about something like 3 plus 5 equals 8? Well, obviously that's not something that you can break down into a truth functional proposition. So Wittgenstein has initially a problem with that. He certainly wants to say that the propositions of arithmetic, like 3 plus 5 is equal to 8, or let's take a shorter one. Let's say 2 plus 3 equals 5. He certainly wants to say that that's true no matter how the world is, like logic. And so it doesn't have anything to do, it's sinnlos, it's empty, but he needs to explain that. And so he comes up with a really interesting idea, and to be very brief about it, the idea is that of an operation. And so numbers like 2 and 3 and 5, they're simply indexes of an operation that you apply. So what's an example of that? Well, the operation might be putting, let's say, apples into, let's say, 3 baskets. So like the operation is putting apples into the baskets. So the operation is, let's call it omega. So omega with the index or the superscript 2, that's like omega 2 is putting 2 apples into the first basket. Omega 3 would be putting 3 apples into the second basket. And then maybe you take them and put them all into the third basket, and what do you have? Omega 5. So you have omega 2 plus omega 3 is equal to omega 5, but those indexes, 2, 3, and 5 over the omegas, that's simply shorthand, which expresses the fact that you could unpack it by just writing the omega operation each time, that many times, depending on what the superscript is. So omega 2 would be omega, omega, omega 3 would be omega, 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 and then omega 5 would be omega, 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 omega 5 times. And there are no numbers there. So what you have on the left-hand side are 2 omegas, 3 omegas, that's 5 omegas when you put them all together like an accordion. And then on the other side you have 5 omegas. So you have 5 omegas equals 5 omegas. No numbers, just the operation unpacked. And you can see that's the tautology. That's like saying A equals A, or x equals x, doesn't say anything. So this is Wittgenstein's idea for explaining how arithmetical truths, the truths of arithmetic, are simply tautologies. Like the truths of logic, they don't say anything about reality. Now, here's where this gets interesting and sort of sets up Wittgenstein's interaction with the Vienna Circle. The Vienna Circle was a group of philosophers, including people like Rudolf Carnap, Friedrich Waismann, Otto Neurath, and Maurice Schlick, and some other people who gathered in Vienna just to discuss philosophical problems. They were very scientifically minded, very anti-metaphysical in the way Wittgenstein was up to a point. And so they wanted to sort of turn philosophy, make it very, very rigorous, and make it as much like science and mathematics as possible. Now, what's interesting about the members of the Vienna Circle is that they had read Wittgenstein's Tractatus when it came out. This is when Wittgenstein, after he finished the Tractatus, he went to teach elementary school in Austria. That didn't work out too well because he was a bit of a tyrant and somewhat abusive with the students. And then he sort of moved back. I think he went back to Vienna and was helped design a house architecturally for his sister Greta, I believe it was. And while he was in Vienna, he met one of the members of the Vienna Circle, I think it was Waismann, and during the time that Wittgenstein had been teaching school in Austria, they had come across the Tractatus and read it, and they were very, very interested by it because they thought that his view that philosophy involved a lot of confusions that could be cleared up by getting a clear view of logic and mathematics, they were very sympathetic to that. That was really part of their sensibility. And so they began reading the Tractatus and wanted to ask Wittgenstein questions about it. And so when they found out through, I believe it was Waismann, that Wittgenstein was in Vienna, meetings were arranged between Wittgenstein and members of the Vienna Circle, some of them. And I want to come back to that in just a minute. But what's interesting about this is when we go back to mathematics, Wittgenstein at best explains how these very primitive truths, the truths of primitive recursive arithmetic, like addition and subtraction and multiplication and division, which can be construed in terms of addition and subtraction, he explained, as we've seen, how those things could be represented as tautologies that don't say anything about the world. They're empty, just like the truths of logic. But what about other mathematical truths? What about calculus? What about the truths of algebra, algebraic truths, or trigonometry, or higher mathematics, things like that? Those things cannot be broken down into those kinds of omega operations where you can see that there are just these bald equivalences between applications of an operation. That kind of method does not work for higher mathematics. And yet people in the Vienna Circle like Carnap and Neurath, these people wanted to say that mathematics, like logic, excuse me, I just have to adjust something here very quickly. Mathematics, like logic, all of mathematics, not just arithmetic and primitive recursive arithmetic, they wanted to say that it was empty too, that it didn't say anything about the world. It was simply true in virtue of meaning, or it was empty. And so, to make a long story short, they came up with the idea of analyticity, that somehow these truths of mathematics are analytic truths. They're simply rules that we set forth that don't say anything about the world. They're sort of like statements like, well, all bachelors are unmarried males. That doesn't really say anything. That's just like a definition. And so what they want to say is this notion of analyticity. They want to apply that to all mathematical truths so that when something is analytic, that means that it's true by virtue of meaning. It doesn't say anything. Whereas if something is a synthetic truth, like all ravens are black, that's something that might be false. That depends on the way the world is. And so the Vienna Circle and logical positivism, which is the movement that they founded, makes very much out of this distinction between the analytic-synthetic distinction in order to explain how higher mathematical truths, among other things, how these higher mathematical truths are empty, are devoid of substantive content, don't say anything about the world, they're simply true in virtue of meaning. And later philosophers like Willard Van Orman Quine, an American philosopher who taught at Harvard for many years, attacked the analytic-synthetic distinction. That's another story that I want to get into this evening, but that's kind of what drew the Vienna Circle to Wittgenstein's work. They liked his approach to logic, they liked his approach to mathematics, but they saw that it couldn't be applied to all of mathematics, and so that motivated them to come up with this expedient, this development, the notion of analyticity, which I'm not going to get into anymore now. I'm not going to try to explain that. Not clear that it can be explained, but that was their attempt to do justice to the spirit of Wittgenstein's view of logic and mathematics in the Tractatus, while taking into account more sophisticated branches of mathematics and trying to extend the basic viewpoint to that. Now, the last thing I want to say about Wittgenstein and the Vienna Circle is the meetings didn't go very well, because it came out eventually that even though Wittgenstein was hostile to metaphysics and really didn't accept religion in any traditional form, on some level, though, he was a deeply religious person in the sense that he wanted to be that way, and he was still drawn to metaphysical conceptions. There's a little bit of that in the Tractatus, sometimes it seems like, in his discussions of solipsism and things like that. Even if he doesn't ultimately accept a metaphysical position, you can see that he feels the tug of that he feels drawn to it, that it's not something that he can give up lightly, whereas people in the Vienna Circle, especially Carnap, who was no-nonsense, very hard-nosed, hard-minded, technically brilliant, he didn't have any use for metaphysics or religion, and he didn't have any problem giving it up because he thought it was all a bunch of nonsense, and that was fine with him. Wittgenstein thought it was all a bunch of nonsense, but that wasn't okay with him because he could see what a deep role these various ideas played in people's lives, and to some extent played in his own life. While he was serving on the Eastern Front in World War I, he underwent a kind of religious conversion and was reading Tolstoy and considered himself a Christian. And so on some level, he was a very religious man, even if he couldn't bring himself ultimately to accept those things as they're traditionally understood in Christianity or Judaism or Islam, and Christianity was the religion he was drawn to. Nevertheless, he felt the tug of that in a way that Carnap and other members of the Vienna Circle did not. And so they really didn't get far in their discussions because there was this fundamental difference of attitude that they couldn't bridge. So that's what I wanted to say about that this evening. Now, let me finish tonight by reading a little bit more of this work that I'm working on. This is the Tractatus Theologico-Philosophicus, and some of this probably won't make a lot of sense, but, let's just consider it a kind of philosophical and theological jazz. I'm just going to riff on it, and, if people hear something interesting, that's great. If not, skip it. You don't have to take it seriously. That's my job, not yours. But let me just read you what I wrote recently. So I also changed the numbers a little bit to make things a little easier to read, so that we don't get bogged down in the decimals. So 0.4. Kierkegaard confronts us with what he calls the paradox of Christ. To profit from his discussion, one must distinguish between two different kinds of paradox. 0.41. Some paradoxes are such that we can do nothing with them. They are dead ends. 0.4101. One example of a dead-end paradox is that of a round square. If I'm asked to calculate the area of such a figure, then I have no idea at all how to proceed. 0.4102. Another example of a dead-end paradox is when right now it both is and is not raining heavily outside. If someone then instructs you to dress appropriately before going outside, you will be completely at a loss about whether or not to wear a raincoat. 0.42. Other paradoxes are fruitful in that we can do something with them. they allow us to move forward. 0.4201. An example of a fruitful paradox is a liar sentence like the sentence quoted in 0.4201, that's this remark, is not true. If true, then since it says it's not true, it is not true. If not true, then since it says it is not true, it is true. Thus it is true if and only if it is not true, and that's a contradiction. 0.32011. On the one hand, there is a sense in which the liar's sentence is neither true nor false. It's neither true nor not true, that is, it's neither true nor false. 0.42012. On the other hand, if the liar's sentence is neither true nor false, then since it says of itself that it is not true, there is a sense in which it is true. 0.2013. These opposing senses can be reconciled by recognizing how the liar's sentence is systematically ambiguous. 0.420131. The liar's sentence may be partially rewritten in logical notation as there is no x, such that x is a truth, and the sentence quoted in 0.4201 expresses x. 0.420132. The sense in which the liar's sentence is neither true nor false is that it expresses no truth in the range of its quantifier, there is no x. That's like there's a negation symbol, backwards ex, there is no x. That's the existential quantifier negated. 0.420133. The sense in which the liar's sentence is true is that it expresses a truth not in the range of its quantifier, there is no x. 0.420134. Oops, let me go back here. 0.420134. This truth is only available from a richer interpretive perspective in which we reflect upon the liar's sentence's initial use. 0.42014. If the liar's sentence does not express a truth in its initial use, but does express a truth available from a richer interpretive perspective, then why doesn't the sentence's interpretation distort rather than give the correct meaning of the sentence's initial use? 0.420141. The answer is that implicit in the quantifier, there is no x, is an iterative operation anticipating a truth the sentence does not express in its initial use, but does express from the richer interpretive perspective. Here's an important point. 0.420142. Similarly, being a descendant is an iterative operation implicit in the quantifier there is an x, in there is an x such that x is the descendant of Schmidt living at such and such an address and time in Philadelphia, and x has 3 children. 0.421043. The descendant operation anticipates a truth this sentence does not express in its initial use when Schmidt and all his descendants still live in Germany, but does express when a descendant of Schmidt comes to live at the relevant address and time in Philadelphia. 0.421044. An operation like being a descendant is iterative because it can be applied to a base, for example Schmidt, to yield a result, for example a descendant of Schmidt, to which the same operation can be applied again to yield a result, for example a descendant of Schmidt. 0.421045. Similarly, the combination of the quantifier with the truth predicate in the liar sentence is the application of an operation that initially yields the sentence in its initial use, where it expresses no truth in the range of its quantifier. 0.420146. A subsequent application of the same operation to the liar sentence's initial use yields the same sentence considered from the richer interpretive perspective where it expresses a truth not in the range of its quantifier. 0.42015. Excuse me, I have to correct something here. 0.42105. 0.42146. That's where it expresses a truth not in the range of its quantifier. 0.42015. So as not to distract from the main thrust of the argument, a fuller discussion of the liar sentence's systematic ambiguity will be relegated to an appendix in the book. That's the book I'm writing. And finally, 0.42016. As will become evident, crucial to developing the new theological perspective is the notion of a certain iterative operation. So that's something that I want to make use of later, this idea that from one perspective, something, a sentence or a claim might be absurd, it might be paradoxical. From a richer perspective, it might say something false, and from an even richer perspective, it might say something true. It depends on what perspective from which the claim or the sentence or the proposition is being considered, that whether it expresses anything at all, or a falsehood or a truth, is going to be dependent on the perspective. So that's all I wanted to say this evening. I'm sorry I had to interrupt there for a minute. My screen was going a little funky, but I think everything is okay now. And again, I know that a lot of that is somewhat complicated, and a lot of it may sound somewhat arcane and unclear, but I'm just riffing on it, and hopefully people enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed my story about Wittgenstein and the Vienna Circle. Until next time, this is Katje Eckhart. Again, I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope everybody has a wonderful Christmas. And I wish everybody a safe, a peaceful, and a restful good night. Be good to each other. Be good to yourself. Take care of each other. I care for all of you. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, bye-bye.